Throughout the course of his reporting career, our next guest has landed in 158 different countries. That gives him a unique perspective on both the geopolitical shifts this past year and what to look for in the year ahead. In what's become a bit of an annual visit at this time of year to our studio, we welcome back Matthew Fisher, Post Media's international affairs columnist and Canada's longest continuously serving foreign affairs correspondent. Matt, it's good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Steve.
Well, we're going to focus on a few key conflict areas from the past year, but in your view, as you've looked at it all, what were the key surprises for you this past year?
It was nothing but surprises. The biggest one, that after about 20 years of rumbling, Russia actually did something about Crimea, and clearly the West wasn't ready for it. I don't even think a lot of Russians were ready for it. And then in the Middle East, we knew, people who follow this closely, that ISIL or ISIS or whatever you want to call the Islamic State were real trouble. But generally, the general population knew very little about it, and politicians certainly were not talking about it. Opinion leaders weren't talking about it. I wasn't talking about it, and I'm not even an opinion leader, but I mean the people who shape government policy weren't. And yet it bit us very, very strongly, and of course has thrown all kinds of things upside down. We were looking for great things in the Middle East with the Arab Spring. That's all forgotten now. And
it's amazing how that's fallen off the radar, right? Nobody's looking for good news out of the Middle East anymore.
It's totally the Arab winter.
It's the Arab winter now. Huh. You're in as good a position as anybody to opine on this. The shooting down of the Malaysian airliner over Ukraine, the war that just sprouted up in Gaza, and perhaps another one pending with Hezbollah in the north of Israel, an Ebola epidemic in parts of Africa. You get the Islamic State, you can add to the list, the number of sort of simultaneous crises all happening in a short space of time. Is that typical?
It's not typical, but I think it is typical of the 21st century, and we had better get used to it. It used to be that we'd have a crisis a year, whether it was in the Philippines with Ferdinand Marcos being deposed by the Aquino family and the Laban Revolution, where they used to make those. There was something big once in a while with riots in South Korea or whatever. That has all changed. On one side, the humanitarian disasters seem to be coming a lot faster. And this may be as a result of global warming. Some people certainly think it is. And then on the other side, these other things. The world is a very unstable place. There was a bit of security at the end of the Cold War when it was a unipolar world, when it really was the United States as top dog. But a lot of other countries did not like that. In particular, Russia and China did not like that one bit. And now, they are influencing events in a few places, particularly Russia, obviously, but China has its own set of problems with all its neighbors as well.
I know it is fashionable to say, and you may even believe it yourself, that America's influence in the world is waning and that it is no longer the singular superpower that it used to be. But I want to read you a little excerpt from Foreign Policy magazine. This is David Rothkopf writing the following: America is back. Despite Washington, despite lousy leadership, despite the rise of other great powers, back because its economy is resilient, back because the other great powers are each facing deep challenges at home, from European coherence to corruption and the slowing growth of job creation in China, back because America remains a hotbed of innovation, back because the fiscal deficit that threatened it has receded, along with the recession that stirred up fears, back because it proved that even at a low point in political creativity, the country could flourish, especially in light of the fact that the low point is likely to end soon. You agree or not?
Totally, totally. And I'm surprised. You know, I've learned at my peril to count America out, but in the last year or two or three, I was certainly one of the ones who was. I had forgotten the lessons I learned in the 1970s and 1980s when I lived for a long time in Germany, and there was Schadenfreude, a great delight at America's economic problems, and when we thought Japan would rule the roost, and America was faltering, and we saw the world very differently. Now, of course, nobody thinks about Japan ruling any roost. The Germans still have a lot to say, but nobody thinks they're going to be a global power. They are, as they were 20 years ago, a European power. And America's back. It reinvents itself all the time. What saved it 20 or 25 years ago was the emergence of those companies like Apple and Microsoft, who became powerhouses throughout the world. And, you know, we've just seen profit statements for those companies in the month of January that are unbelievable. And now, because of oil and fracking and all of this, and what it does, it isn't only the financial thing, it gives America confidence. Its swagger is back.
Well, let's see how that might have an impact on foreign policy, because, of course, Barack Obama came into office pledging to take America out of the war in Afghanistan, out of the war in Iraq, and then, of course, with the economic problems that America was experiencing as well, that, I guess, propelled a greater interest in focusing on domestic issues as opposed to the wider world. But now comes this America economic resurgence. Now comes the #1 energy-producing country in the world again. Is that changing the way it acts on the international stage now?
Not quite yet. When Obama is no longer the head of state in the United States, this will, I think, change. Whether the Democrats win next time or whether the Republicans do.
Because you're figuring the Republicans will definitely have a more muscular foreign policy presence, and if it's Hillary Clinton, she will too.
She will too, certainly. And I think, frankly, any other Democrat will as well. The America that's a bit isolationist, that's certainly the trend that Obama wanted to develop. There's a time lag. Now America is ready to come back, but politically and in terms of getting proper financing for the military, there is a lag. There's still talk about cutting the budget. The U.S. Army is cutting 100,000 soldiers right now. There's the big debate about how many surface ships and how many submarines the U.S. should have. All of these things have staggering implications, but the U.S. is now investing money in a 6th generation fighter aircraft. Well, we all talk about whether Canada or other countries are doing the right thing by perhaps getting the F-35. America's onto the 6th one. They're now contemplating a new fleet of bomber aircraft that will cost, in today's dollars, $580 million each. And of course, that makes the F-35 look like chump change. And they're looking at procuring 100 of these. All of this tells you where America is headed militarily. And so often, the economy is the engine that drives U.S. foreign policy. But what backs it up is the military and having money to spend on the military. They haven't had it for a couple of years.
Well, here's one policy that has been a very bellicose, that has taken rather a very bellicose approach for the last half century. And back in December, the President of the United States took a very different approach. Check the monitor over my shoulder and roll tape, please.
Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba. In the most significant changes in our policy in more than 50 years, we will end an outdated approach that for decades has failed to advance our interests, and instead, we will begin to normalize relations between our two countries. Through these changes, we intend to create more opportunities for the American and Cuban people and begin a new chapter among the nations of the Americas.
When were you last in Cuba?
Just now. Just got out of Cuba and had a fascinating week there as a tourist. Looking around the country, attending baseball games, talking to a lot of Cubans and a lot of Canadian tourists who feel very upset that Americans are probably going to come and spoil their tourist paradise. And I tell them, you mean the exploitation of Cubans by Canadians will now be replaced by the exploitation of Cubans by Americans.
What do you think of the policy change by Obama?
The policy change, I think, is way, way, way overdue. But it is not only that the United States has been a laggard in this regard. Cuba has not wanted to talk with the United States. It has not wanted to engage the United States. And the negotiations that will take place will be very tough because Cuba has some bottom lines or red lines that they will not cross, or so they say. But you know, the genie is out of the bottle. Everywhere I went in Cuba, Everybody wants the United States to be there yesterday. When I used to go to Cuba 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there was quite a bit of support still for the Castros, for the brothers, the Beards, as they call them, and they make this hand motion. 10 years ago, there were still a few people, but fewer people than 20 years ago. And now, I could not find one person who supported the Castros. Not one, anywhere. Now, they don't diss them, they don't scream about them, they're not saying horrible things.
What's the alternative that they want?
They want the United States and they want money. They've had it with 60 years of extreme privation. You know, it's a country where they get 5 eggs a month while the Canadians enjoy their buffet meals at those hotels.
But are they looking for, like, American constitutional democracy, or are they just looking for different communists to run the place?
No, they don't want anything to do with communism. Communism is in total disgrace there. I don't think they've thought at all about what political model they want. They just don't want the one they've got, and what they think they're going to get out of this is big American investment.
Let's see if we can do one more region of the world. We're going to go all the way, halfway around the world. We got this clip ready? Can we show Matthew what he had to say last year when he was here?
Oh, God.
Here we go. Roll tape, please.
Japan is declaring more and more that the Japanese bought the islands from a private citizen that China now wants just to the south and west of Okinawa.
So this is causing increasing tension as well.
And I see no good there. The thing that might save it is that, of course, there's a huge trade relationship between these two countries at the same time. And so maybe that will keep both sides powder dry for a while. But there is a tremendous potential for conflict in Asia that I think a lot of us ignore.
First of all, you could see it in the wide shot there. You've lost a lot of weight, first of all. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
How much weight have you lost, Matthew?
About 70, 75 pounds.
Good for you. You look much healthier now, so congratulations.
Well, I'm healthier, so they tell me.
Okay, good. Second thing is, okay, obviously we were talking about this China-Japanese issue from a year ago. Anything changed in this regard a year later?
Well, the behavior of China and Japan is a little bit less bellicose, not much more bellicose. The Japanese recently had big military maneuvers that they conducted with Australia and the United States. China is going to hold, for the third time in their entire history, a huge military parade in Beijing in September to show the world that they are a military power to be reckoned with. So those things are still there. Japan has spent a lot of money in the last year on its Navy and on its Air Force. It's decided in the past year to get F-35s, for example. So has South Korea. So the fundamentals are still there for all kinds of problems, and the Chinese continue to build those artificial islands in the South China Sea, which present a problem for the Philippines. I understand that almost every day the Chinese and Japanese air forces are precariously close to each other in the disputed islands southwest of Japan. That hasn't changed, but the rhetoric is down a bit, and I think trade has had a lot to do with it. They both sort of said, we have too much to lose. I was in Japan a couple of months ago, and I was really surprised. There are Chinese tourists everywhere.
In Japan?
In Japan. And there are Japanese learning to speak Chinese because the Chinese arrive with their pockets full of yen.
Well, let me ask about some of the other neighbors. China's relationship with, for example, the Philippines, with Malaysia, with Vietnam, how are they doing?
Brittle. And China is trying to establish greater influence by creating its own development bank. The Asian Development Bank is actually in the Philippines. The United States likes it that way. Japan takes the lead on that for the West. Canada is a member of that. The Chinese want to develop their own way to influence events there. They already have a huge economic say in countries such as Burma. They're all over the place in Burma. That problem very much remains. And I would guess, because the financial interests are so big in the north, that we may see more in the South China Sea, where those smaller countries, Malaysia and the Philippines, can't really resist China. But the upshot of all this is that everybody loves America now in Asia. And you know, they were vilified certainly by the Vietnamese, but they were kicked out of the Philippines. And now America is back there too. Everybody wants to be America's friend in Asia because of China.
Everybody wants to be America's friend in Asia because of China.
Yes.
That's the story to keep watching for 2050.
That's it's one of many. Unfortunately, it's one of many, and who knows what surprises will be thrown up, Steve. You can only say that there's going to be lots.
Well, hopefully you'll be here a year from now, and we'll talk about those.
I look forward to that.
Always a delight to have you here in our studio. Matthew Fisher, Canada's longest continuously serving foreign affairs correspondent. Good to see you again, Matthew.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.